Let's start, Mitch, with your role as the co-chair. How's the campaign going?
It's going to be close. And I think everybody who predicts something other than that doesn't really know what they're talking about. Every presidential election for the last couple of cycles, and you had David Axelrod up here a bit ago, this election is going to come down to 7 or 8 swing states and certain people in those swing states. And both of the campaigns, according to all the polls, are as close as they ever have been, and everybody should expect it to be as close as the last time, which President Biden won, by the way, by 8 million votes.
The other guy raised 10 million more than he did the time before, though, so it's going to be interesting to watch. Look, for businesses, of course, elections happen and transitions happen one way or the other. We're looking for predictability and stability, and we wanted to talk to you a little bit more about infrastructure, particularly because of the really transformative policy of the IRA. And it sounds like the other government, if it were to come in, might even keep it in its in its form. Let's talk about infrastructure, and let's talk about that in connection to democracy itself. Ian kicked us off by saying democracies are alive and well and they're doing well. That may be so. I'm not sure how well they're doing in Canada and the United States when it comes to developing infrastructure. What's your thoughts on how we do that?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with all of you. And Ian, thank you for having me. Just a couple of general thoughts. First of all, what business wants is the same thing that regular folks want. They want stability. They want to be able to grow their businesses. Folks that work want to be able to feed their family. They want to be able to have high-paying jobs that allow you to pay tuition, pay rent, pay the mortgage. They want to grow the economy. And there's a lot of talk that goes on in Washington about actually how to do that. So I think it's worth taking a moment, because I'm a little bit struck by listening today with how hard everybody in here is working to normalize Donald Trump, as though we have some collective amnesia about how it was when he was in office. He will be the same way he was before, which is to say chaotic. You can't possibly have forgotten that when he was in office, he had 17 cabinet secretaries that left his employ. The gentleman that was here before was talking about, well, he's going to have another episode of folks that he hires, and that, well, Biden's people have all stayed with him. You have to just sit on that for a second. If you have stability in your administration, if you govern well, if you have thoughtful policies and procedures, if you implement well, and you create something good, people generally stay around. When you don't, if you have chaos, you'll recall the conversation the president had with Canada President Trump had with Canada shortly after he got in office. Not only with Canada, but with his NATO allies about defense spending that you were talking about. You can expect the same thing again. So this sense that these two guys are equal and it's all going to be okay and it really doesn't matter because you're going to end up on your feet no matter what, I would disabuse you strongly of that notion. And the proof in the pudding is that when President Biden ran for office, he said, listen, I have a very clear vision of where I want to take America. I want to rebuild the middle class. So his trade policy, his economic policy, his national security policy, all of those things surround the idea of rebuilding the middle class. And the idea is pretty simple, is that if you invest federal dollars in places that really matter, with people that really matter, the private sector will join him. So you'll have a public-private partnership to actually invest in things and invest in people. And that's exactly what has happened. And when you see the results of that, these are just facts. This is not a political statement. In Donald Trump's term of office, they lost 2.5 million jobs. They came in on the end of COVID. But in Biden's administration, with these policies, the economy is robust. Inflation is still too high. It's down from 9% down to 3%. But what has happened in the last 3.5 years, me sitting in the offices that both David and the gentleman who was here before sat in, is that the Biden administration got to work and passed 4 of the most significant pieces of domestic legislation in the history of the United States of America that included the Inflation Reduction Act, that included the CHIPS Act, and of course the Infrastructure Act, which is about $1.8 trillion in spending. So you should ask, well, how's that gone? Because President Biden is interested in execution, which is why he hired me. Because most people say, we passed the bill, now let's go home and pat ourselves on the back about it. President Biden said, no, you have to execute. And for those of you that don't know much, I kind of started my career as a local government official. I was the lieutenant governor of Louisiana, and I was the mayor of the city of New Orleans and rebuilt the city after Katrina. So not just is the what important, but the how, the who, and the when. And that is why President Biden said, listen, we've got this money, let's get it to the ground. Let's get it to the ground through the governors, through the mayors. Let's incentivize the private sector to come in. Somebody said that's not going to work. Biden said, yes, it is going to work. So today, just for y'all to have a little bit to chew on for lunch, we have 56,000 infrastructure projects that are underway in the United States right now. We have, it's in every state, almost in every county. We have roads, bridges, airports, ports, waterways. We're delivering high-speed internet to everybody in the United States of America, and because of the IRA, working on the clean energy economy. And that money right now is moving down to the ground, it's coming out, and the private sector has responded, not rhetorically, but with their money. So there's about $600 billion that we put out the door. The private sector has put in about $800 billion. And right now, in the United States, we have 22 manufacturing plants that are being built in the north, the south, the east, and the west. So business has responded, and of course, you follow the stock market.
Well,
the stock market is
you
doing
can
really
do
well.
things we can't do, right? You've got the U.S. dollar, your currency is the world reserve.
But we can't force the private sector to invest with us. But when Siemens shows up and says, I like what you're doing with completely rebuilding your train set, we'd like to help you do that. Or if we're going to build a high-speed rail between Las Vegas and Los Angeles, and Brightline shows up, or if we're building EV manufacturing facilities, or if we're rebooting the car industry, we can't force Ford, Stellantis, and GM to show up, but they showed up in a big way. And so the private sector has responded outside of the political rhetoric with their money because they know where the return on investment is.
Is there a concern that whether Republican or Democrat, we're seeing far more protectionist tendencies in the United States? And I say this with respect because I'm sure you're told Canadians are all nice and all, but Ian told us to be provocative and challenged, so I'm going to. You know, we're witnessing in many ways America retrenching. We're seeing America attracting the capital. Isn't it important to you that the neighborhood also does well? I mean, shouldn't this be about North America? One of your colleagues said yesterday, I forget that I'm North American, not just American.
Well, first of all, Canada is one of our most important trading partners. We share national security, we share infrastructure. We have been best allies for 150 years. For those of you who have forgotten what Trump did the second he got in office vis-a-vis Canada, I want to remind you that he did not treat you like a friend. And he did the same thing with our NATO allies. There's a big difference between being an isolationist and being a protectionist. And they are vastly different things. Donald Trump is an isolationist, essentially. And you were talking before about whether elections to Congress and the Senate matter. They matter a lot, especially on funding for Ukraine. And as somebody noted, one senator can hold up an entire trade package. So if you represent the isolationist wing, if you think America should retrench, should be on its own, doesn't need allies, that really kind of is the Trump way. That's not the Joe Biden way. Joe Biden is a little bit more, quote unquote, protectionist. He wants to build a middle class because even though NAFTA was beneficial in some quarters, in some parts of the United States, if you noticed, we had cities that used to manufacture things, and towns that used to manufacture things, and then they manufactured them overseas. And in the United States, we allowed those towns and communities not to get reinvested in, and consequently it caused a huge problem. Joe Biden has fixed that. He's in the process of fixing that. So in the Inflation Reduction Act and in the infrastructure bill, if we're going into a community that used to be a coal community or it used to be an oil and gas community, and we've now cleaned up the brownfield sites, the Superfund sites, the abandoned orphan wells that were left behind because industry didn't clean it up, not only are we cleaning it up, we're making sure that we do it with the people who are living there that used to work in the coal communities. That's a little bit of a different thing. So there is some similarity between Donald Trump and Joe Biden about making sure that money stays in America and we use products that are made in America. But I know the ambassador's here, and she alluded to this earlier with Ambassador Cohen. We spend a lot of time in the Biden administration talking to our allies in peacetime, especially Canada, about how to navigate the intricacies and kind of the pinpoints that rose, especially during the Inflation Reduction Act. Lots of communication went on in the relationship. I think between the United States and Canada is as good today as it's ever been, and will continue to be under the second term of President Biden.
So one of the, if not the most important issue in many ways, is supply chain resiliency that's come out of post-COVID, and obviously with Russia and everything else going on. We're able to complement each other in many ways. I mean, Canada likes to think it can feed and fuel and fertilize the world, and add critical minerals to that. All of those things need a predictable, stable regulatory environment in which to build infrastructure. We're in a country that retroactively canceled an improved pipeline. You're in a country that an administration came in and canceled a very large project in an energy project from Canada as well. In that environment, isn't it making it hard for business to invest in the infrastructure that's going to be necessary? We talk about critical minerals like there's fountains of lithium flowing freely, and no, they're in the ground. And it's taking too long to get them out of the ground. Senator Manchin is working on bringing permitting reform and others. What can you do to ensure that businesses who are agnostic when it comes to where they invest, they go to where a dollar becomes two, have confidence that if you start something, you can see a project through that's got a 20, 30-year horizon, not 4 years?
Well, you raise a couple of very good points. The first that I would say is this. It is a false equivalency between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, as though it doesn't matter to the way the world works. If you don't have a stable democracy that's functioning, that respects the rule of law, that respects the right to contract, that is really about chaos as opposed to order and stability, all these other discussions we're having about can you permit a project quickly enough is an extra conversation that gets very, very difficult. And even though, and I agree with Ambassador Cohen, that the United States is a very strong place. Right now, if you turned on the TV and you turned on Fox or you turned on something else, you would think that the United States is about to fall apart. Remember, we have about 30,000 mayors in America in a very decentralized system. Some of those mayors are running major cities that are bigger than some countries. The same thing is true with governors. And for the most part, right now, I've traveled, 160,000 miles to 130 cities. There's great stuff happening on the ground in America. However, if you just watch Congress, you would think that we couldn't find the bathroom together. And in some instances, that is true, but Congress is still important. It is fair to say that the United States has been around for a long time and continue to be, and that we're very strong and we're very stable, but it is not true, in my opinion, to say, well, then does it matter, because either one of these guys is going to produce the same result. That is not true. They're very, very different people. They have very, very different temperaments. Donald Trump is the guy he has always been, and that's the guy he's always going to be. So if you like chaos, you like instability, you like getting yelled at, you like him firing people all the time, you like him keeping you guessing, you like him being an isolationist, hating NATO, that's great, because that's what you're going to get. You've seen with Joe Biden over the years, notwithstanding the fact that people say, oh, he's 81, he has been a very, very, very stable source of what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. Now, the other thing, too, is on permitting reform, as a general rule, I was the mayor of New Orleans after Katrina hit. So we had to rebuild that whole city. We lost 1,800 people. By the way, the Canadian Mounties got to New Orleans before the U.S. military did. So thank you for that, and we really appreciate it.
Have a horse, will travel.
Absolutely. It was incredible. Y'all have been terrific. But as you get in this, remember, there are 56,000 projects going on right now. And so when people say, oh, my God, nothing's getting done because of permitting, that is absolutely not true. 90% of these projects are moving. Having said that, President Biden has said to me many times when he sees me, he doesn't ask me how my wife and my kids are doing anymore, which he used to do. He just says, Mitch, hurry the hell up. Hurry up and go faster. And of course, we don't build big stuff as quickly as we should. And permitting reform is a critical piece of the Inflation Reduction Act that Senator Manchin and other people are working on, because predictability is important. Now, if you're going to, every time you have a campaign, there are going to be some things that are hot button issues that become just bigger. So the pipeline or NAFTA, all of those big issues got to be issues in the middle of a campaign, which became really kind of the lightning rods. But on the ground where it's happening, most of these projects are getting built in pretty quick time and are making significant progress.
Now, in this room, of course, there are a lot of leaders from the large business communities, and there's been a constant attack. I'm not suggesting it's the president, just in general in politics. Big business is bad, our courts are bad, our media is bad, our governments are bad, everybody's a workers' party, everybody's interested in the SMEs and so forth. In that context, what advice do you have to the private sector, who has to be an essential partner with the public sector in building our economy and building the infrastructure necessary to support it?
Well, first thing, again, as I said, as the mayor of New Orleans, having to rebuild that city and understanding how you rebuild not just government entities or public infrastructure, but private businesses as well. Nothing happens without a partnership between the government, federal, state, and local, the business sector, the private sector, the philanthropic community, the business alliances, and labor, essentially. The things where you can make great headway and do really, really big things is when everybody is at the table. And in the Biden administration, having worked in the White House for 2 years, we rarely did anything without all of those entities being at the table, listening to what the interests were, and trying to find a way to get to yes, as opposed to demonizing everybody that's in the room. Now, there is a point of view that the president has that's different from Donald Trump. Donald Trump believes in trickle-down economics.
I feel like we should call Chris back, in fairness.
Joe, well, I'm not saying anything political. This is just a fact. Donald Trump's theory of governing and his theory of the business world is trickle-down economics. He thinks if you give tax cuts to very big corporations and if you give tax cuts to the very wealthy, that somehow that's all going to trickle down to the ground. The president's theory is I'd rather do it the other way. I'd rather make sure that there's a fair tax burden, that people hopefully will make as much money as they possibly can, but they should pay their fair share, and that the benefits get down to the men and women who are actually doing the work, because when you push it back up, everybody does better. Joe Biden just says, listen, that's my theory of life. We can just compare the receipts. In his administration, we've created 15.5 million jobs. By all measures, the economy is very, very strong. I don't know how many economists we have in the room, but all of you were wrong when you predicted that we'd be in recession already. You'll be right one day, yeah. I'm sure.
So is a broken clock.
So y'all just hang on for a little while. But you will recall being fair-minded, at least in the business community. Everybody said, oh my God, you know, if you pass the IRA, if you pass, you know, the infrastructure bill, if you pass the CHIPS Act, which by the way is for our mutual security, which is incredible and going really, really well right now, and I'll give you the example in Arizona, you would have to say that this economic theory is working really, really well. Let me be very quick to point out, in case there are any politicians in the room listening, inflation is still too high. Inflation is a problem all over the world. It has been reduced by 2/3, and we're continuing to do that. And the Fed, of course, which needs to remain independent, under Trump it will not, has to do its job based on the information that they see. But let me just give you this one little quick anecdote about Arizona and the CHIPS Act. The idea was if the federal government shows up and we decide that we want to protect our national security by manufacturing chips here and not in Taiwan because of the international concerns that were expressed earlier, that the United States and Canada will be the masters of their own destiny as it relates to our national security and our economic security. And so as a consequence, we passed the CHIPS Act. The Department of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, has been, with the president's blessing, investing that money with private companies. Let's use Intel as an example in Arizona, in Phoenix, where they got a substantial sum of money and laid on their private sector money. They're actually building what they call fabs, otherwise manufacturing plants. It's going to create 30,000 jobs, high-paying jobs in Arizona, and they're manufacturing jobs right now. There are 3 young women who I met the other day that are part of the Navajo Nation that have learned how to weld, that are now actually building that plant so that they can manufacture the chips so that we can keep our supply chains moving and protect our national security. That's when you see something come full circle from the White House all the way down to the ground and know why that theory of governing actually works.
It's a great note to end on, because nothing's more important than national security and economic security. Ladies and gentlemen, Mitch Landrieu.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.